Jon Schulz. Welcome back to the State of Streaming podcast. We're officially calling this the Viant earnings brunch, but don't turn off. If you heard earnings and you're like, I'm not a finance bro, like it's okay. What we're really going to inspect here is what is driving the growth and success of best quarter ever for Viant. So Jon, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Absolutely. I want to start with some of the statistics, some of the highlights that stood out on yesterday's call, or on Monday's call rather. Revenue up 34%, 50% of revenue coming from connected television, 5% of revenue coming from the end-to-end Viant AI outcomes product. 80% of connected TV is being transacted on a direct basis versus open auction, up from 50% in Q1. The Iris Content ID is on 50% of the connected TV bid stream, 70% by end of year. And this one really blew my mind. I think everyone was tuned into the Knicks NBA Finals, but Game 5, peak CPM, almost 2x the Super Bowl. $120
Right.
CPM. Crazy. These were some of the stats that stood out to me on yesterday's call. What's driving the success?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think, like with any company, we've been around for a while. We've been around for 27 years. So there's no lightning in a bottle, right? It's a calculated plan and strategy and working the strategy. And we decided a few years ago that we really needed to focus on differentiation for the platform. And some of the things you mentioned, Tim, with Iris ID, that was an acquisition we made about 18 months ago. TVision and the attention signals, doubling down on identity around household ID, and really cleaning up the path to the inventory, right? And that's the direct access. I think we launched direct access back in 22 and really focused on, how do we go directly to publisher and really take a lot of the inefficiency, the non-value added resellers out of the middle, because that creates a scenario where both sides win, right? If you grab that 20 or 30% of margin that's just going back and forth to the resellers, the publishers get a higher yield, and at the same time, the advertisers get a more efficient CPM. And that can happen in tandem because you're splitting all that inefficient margin that sits in the middle. And so none of these are things that just came about. These are things that we've been focused on and working on for quite some time.
And that was apparent throughout the call that this wasn't just a quarter that things went really well. This is a long-term plan and vision, well executed. What really stood out to me was that the call actually didn't sound that much different than like just Viant marketing in general, what the team is saying on socials. It was very much a uniform story and a narrative that is aligned, and a testament to the 27 years of being focused on solving this one problem for the buy side. Can you talk to us about how that's different, how the buyer focus for Viant is a unique distinction? Because we talk about Amazon DSP, we talk about Google's DV360, we talk about Meta, ironically, 3 of the companies in the Mag 7, the only segment of the market that seems to be growing distinctly different than Viant's approach. Can you take us through that?
Yeah. I mean, part of the history, and I've been around for a good chunk of that history. Back in the early days, there was this idea around exclusive inventory. So we could do deals with publishers where we could represent their inventory exclusively. That kind of changed and evolved. We spent a period of time as part of a content company. So we were under Time Inc., and then Time Inc. got acquired by Meredith, and then we spun out independently. And all of that background gives us a really interesting perspective of both sides, right? And understanding the motivations for the publisher and the publisher monetization, as well as what the advertisers focused on. And for me personally, half of my career was on the brand side, on the advertiser side in automotive and pharma. So it's easy for me to take that perspective. And the fact of the matter is, these companies, if you break down their financials, 75+% of their revenue comes from ad sales, right? So do they have buying products? Sure, they have buying products. Google has DV360, Amazon has Amazon DSP, but when you look at the monetization, take Amazon, for example, 80+% of it is listing ads or the things that they own. They're owned and operated. Google, it's YouTube, it's paid search, it's their network. I mean, that's what really drives it. So they do have buying interfaces, but the buying interfaces are really a gateway to their inventory. And I don't blame them for that. I'm not being critical. I think it's actually, if you can pull it off, it's a good business model. I mean, going back to the stat that we like to use, it was the exact stat is 52% of the top advertisers have only grown on an average of 1% annually in the last 15 years. GDP is only 2.4%. They're not even keeping up with GDP. But if you look at the Mag 7 over that same period, they grew 550%. So what that means is the platforms getting the ad dollars are doing quite well, but the advertisers are not, and they're not showing the growth. And it's a complex problem, but it's one that we can solve.
And when you draw a big circle around it like that, it starts to become obvious. And the outcomes product that we talked about in the lead up is Viant's attempt at maybe offering an alternative to kind of the set it and forget it products, Performance Max with Google and with Meta. Obviously, they have kind of these end-to-end outcome related products or workflows. How does the Viant approach differ, and what is it that's resonating with advertisers?
Yeah, I think there's really two things here. So picking up on the growth story, right? The first thing to keep in mind is the problem is the over focus on performance, right? At any point in time, only 5% of customers are in market, right? You can take automotive, you can take, travel, you can take whatever vertical you want, and it's going to vary by vertical, but say 5 to 10% of people are actually in market at this moment. Like you're in market for brunch, right? You're in market for,
I am actively in
not
market.
everybody is, right? Not everybody is. So, but that over focus on performance has funneled a majority of the ad dollars against that 5% to try and convert that demand now. It's very measurable. And again, everybody's looking to hit the number, chase the number. The problem is you're not doing anything for future demand or demand generation, right? And that's really where CTV is at its best. TV for decades has been the best format for, with sight, sound, and motion, to really generate that demand. And you learn about things. How can I search about something or type something in ChatGPT if I don't know it exists, right? So you need that ad to really stimulate that interest and that demand that leads to consideration and ultimately purchase. And so I think that is a bigger issue that's stumping growth right now, is just an overinvestment on the performance side, looking for instant results. But when you come to outcomes, you're exactly right. What we're basically offering is a solution outside of the walled gardens, so across the open internet, to be able to drive performance campaigns and deliver, measurable outcomes for advertisers.
Help us define the open internet. Seems like that's an active debate. What is the open internet? What's the open internet to Viant and for the outcomes product?
Yeah, I think the open internet is anything that you can buy programmatically, outside of the walled garden. So for example, as a demand side platform that sees 150 billion bid requests a day, we can't buy YouTube. We can't buy into YouTube. You have to go through Google's tools to buy YouTube. We can't buy into Amazon. We can't buy into Meta, right? So if you want to buy those properties, you have to use their tools and you have to buy into them that way. Everything else. So if you want Disney, if you want Paramount, if you want Warner, if Fox, any of that other content, Peacock, that is all available and buyable through the open internet. The example from the earnings call on the game 5 of the NBA Finals and the big comeback and the $120 CPM, and we can dig into what that means and how that works. But, that is the open internet. So yes, YouTube is interesting. Yes, Prime Video has Thursday Night Football, which is a great property, but they also have a lot of other stuff that's maybe lower attention or not as high in demand, right? So as an advertiser, it's about meeting my audience where they are. And so it's not always going to be in the walled gardens.
The Iris acquisition back in 2024, earlier this year, acquiring TVision, which enabled that Nix insight. Can you take us through that? What did you learn? How did we learn it? And how are advertisers using that?
Yeah, so TVision is really interesting. So they're the second largest panel in the US. So it's a in-home opt-in panel, nationally represented, and they really are able to measure three things very effectively. Is someone in the room, right?
Okay, that's important.
30% of the time ads run to an empty room, right?
Wow.
So how
30%.
can an ad work if I didn't see it or if nobody was in the room, right? So is someone in the room? If someone's in the room, how many people are in the room, right? Co-viewing is an amplifier. If there's one person in the room, it's a lot different if there's five people in the room in terms of the impact or potential impact of that ad, right? So in-room presence, co-viewing, and then second by second eyes on screen attention, right? So that's basically we're all sitting watching the game or watching whatever we watch, probably with our phone, maybe with a tablet, maybe with a laptop. Your eyes go down, right? You're responding to a text message, you're scrolling for something, you heard something, you're looking up. Your eyes aren't on the screen. So we're able to capture second by second eyes on screen attention. And what that allows us to do then is look at ads and ad effectiveness. So if you're an advertiser, why would you want that data? Well, I just launched this new ad campaign. At the 10-second mark, people are turning away from the TV. Maybe there's something with that ad that I could improve or I could do better. Or maybe it was the placement. Maybe I was in the last position in the pod and I should have been in the first position in the pod or something like that. So the advertiser or the brand, and then oftentimes what we see when we look through the data is bigger brands might have 6 or 8 TV commercials running at any point in time, and they're not all weighted equally. Well, very often, one of the lower attention ads is getting the highest weight.
Oh, wow.
And so if I'm again putting my advertiser hat on, if I'm the advertiser, I'd want to know that, right? I'm either running it too much or it's actually not the highest attention or my best creative. I might feel like it is, but the customers are voting with their attention, right? So that would inform me to maybe change my mix or my rotation. And then you can look at the attention by programming. So if I'm running programming, if I'm running YouTube, because of course TVision can measure everything that comes through the screen. So whether it's linear, whether it's streaming, whether it's walled garden, if it's Prime or YouTube, so we can see where that attention is by day part, by programming, et cetera. And that is amazing information. And then if you take it a step further to, what Tim was talking about on earnings, all of a sudden now you can start to bid against that attention and either bid up or down. And it goes both ways, right? The example they gave was one of the greatest comebacks in NBA Finals history, where I think I, myself, and everybody else watching that game in the third quarter was like, this one's over, right?
Over. We're tuning off, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not $120 CPM, actually.
Right.
It's probably like 2.
Or interestingly, I'm not turning it off because I got my buddies over. I'm just not watching it, right?
It's background
the
noise.
attention goes to zero, right? Because
Wow.
I'm going to go have some pizza or I'm going to go yuck it up or I'm going to, I'm not attentively watching that program at that point. Then all of a sudden the comeback happens and somebody's like, hey, this is a 5-point game. Now all the attention is going right back to the roof because first of all, you can't believe it. And then secondly, you're locked. Now you're like, my goodness, they could pull this off. They could actually win this game. And so those are the kinds of things. So right there, you went from a plummet and all in the same program, by the way, you went from probably a pretty big dip in attention right when they hit that huge 40-point or 50-point lead. But then all of a sudden the attention shot off the charts when the game got closed again. And that's where having that signal in the platform and being able to buy against that signal is such a benefit because you're not overpaying or underpaying. You're lining it up based on the attentive signal.
Let's stay on that. Let's stay on the signal conversation because what I see is like a full streaming stack from Viant. I'm going to share some additional statistics here. The Viant household ID is in 80% of programmatic bid requests, covers 96% of connected TV requests. It's mapped to 95% of US households, which is amazing. That's more than the internet connected number of households. So you've got a great purview of what the actual population looks like. The Iris Content ID, we mentioned this earlier, is on 50% of the bid stream and targeting 70% by end of year. Stats, signal, buzzwords, what does it mean?
Well, it means a lot, right? Because I think the one thing that we can say with certainty is if you look at the walled gardens, they have high fidelity in their identity signal, right? You're logged in all day, all the time, and that's very difficult to match, right? So you look at a lot of the third party, LiveRamp's been in the news a lot because of the Publicis acquisition. Ramp ID in the bid stream we see at maybe 30 to 35%. It's good. It's a good proxy as a third party signal and a good proxy. But when you start to get to 80% of the bid stream, 95%, 96% household coverage, you're kind of consensus at that point. And you've got the ability then to really target at scale, a lot higher accuracy. And again, at the end of the day, as a buy side only platform, we are looking for outcomes and performance for the advertisers. We want to deliver on their goals and objectives. The more fidelity you have in your signals, the more accurately you can target. I mean, you look at contextual, right? When we acquired Iris, they were about 7%. Now it's north of 50%, and we're continuing to scale that, right? So at 7%, it's not really a currency, right? At 50%, it certainly is in the conversation, and at 70%, you're there, right? So I think those are the things that were, and that's why these things don't happen overnight. You continue to invest, you continue to do the partnerships, the matches, the integrations, and you scale over time.
There was a great example on the call about a grocery store that uses their first party customer data, matches to the Viant household ID, and then applies that to their campaigns. Is that an example? I'm sure that there's lots of them like that you're familiar with. Could you just maybe take us through the workflow and specifically scale? How do we apply like really precise targeting and still get enough scale and reach from that?
Yeah. So there are a lot of advertisers, not all, because if you look at CPG brands, they don't really have customer data, but the retailer does. So there are brands that have customer data and they want to, in the case of the grocery store, right? They're the retailer, right? So they probably have the loyalty card data or whatever. They're capturing the basket, they're capturing the transaction data. So where they do have first party data, because of our depth and identity and our identity spine, we can do the matching and onboarding. We've always done that ourselves. We've never used a third party. Now, some people do use third parties to do matches and onboards, and we're agnostic, so we'll integrate with anyone. But we've always done that. If you look at what we're doing now, we're in a political cycle, right? So the political advertising, whether we like it or not, that's a lot of what we're going to see for the next several months, right? Most of the political agencies have constituent lists. They have voter lists. They have, lists that they want to go against, or they're very geo-bound, right? It's a state issue or it's a local issue or whatever. So your accuracy, your ability to match and be very accurate at that level is critical, because if it's an election in Kentucky and I'm serving an ad in Wyoming, it's probably not going to have much effect on the outcome of that election. So that's where it really does matter.
So, Jon, all of this comes down to one kind of key imperative word: measurement. And I think for the advertiser, it's, did I sell more stuff? And we talked about how growth has really been limited for the S&P 500 outside of a few companies, and that trickles down to small, local, medium-sized businesses. How are your advertisers, how are Viant advertisers and brands, how are they approaching outcome as a measurement proxy?
Yeah, I think that what's happened, and again, this is, you hear about all the friction between the CMO and CFO and stuff like that, and going back to the growth numbers, right? When you do your quarterly earnings and when you do your report, did you hear any mention of clicks or impressions or views? Or no? It's about revenue growth. It's about profitability. It's about adjusted EBITDA. It's a shareholder return. Those are the metrics that matter. Right. And so everything else is a Proxy could be a leading indicator, but it's really about coming down to what's moving the needle. And like we talked about, most of the brands, a lot of the brands are just not experiencing the growth. Now, some of that is market trends, right? You look at things like alcohol consumption on the decline. That's kind of a generational thing. There are macro factors that can impact that. I'm not saying that advertising is the only thing that, that drives everything. There are macro factors, but I do think that too often advertisers are kind of hitting the easy button. They're over investing in just a few platforms and basically putting all of their fortunes against that bet. And it is a bet. And so I really believe, if I was the message I would leave anybody with now is choice is key. And being able to reach as much of your target audience as you can in as many different ways as you can is critical. And that kind of circles back to our open internet discussion. There are a lot of people that watch YouTube and consume the walled gardens, but not everyone. And certainly if you look at time spent, they're not there all day. And so they're doing other things. And so if you really want to surround a customer, if you really want to drive demand generation and new customer growth, you have to have a diverse approach and you have to be pulling a number of levers. It's never going to be easy to just spend money in one or two areas. And so that's probably the biggest thing I would tell advertisers is really to think about that and expand their reach. We look at the data, we look at now with TVision and we see a lot of people, their streaming plan is YouTube. That's it. And it's like, you think about Disney, you think about Peacock, you think about, Paramount, you think about all of the quality programming and content that's out there. There's no way you're maximizing if you're just leveraging one channel.
Absolutely. We caught up with Emily from MRI Simmons recently on the podcast, and there was an insight that she shared was oftentimes advertisers think that, hey, I'm reaching my audience through this one place or by adding these layers. That's not necessarily the case. It does require deeper inspection of where is the audience, where is the attention, and a lot of what you've described here today, Jon, I think helps advertisers accomplish that. If folks want to learn more about Viant and what you're up to, where should they go?
They could visit our website, viantinc.com, or, reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd happy to talk to you.
Beautiful. We'll make sure those are both linked close by, easy to find. I'm sure we'll have more conversations like this, maybe after future earnings calls. Jon, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Anytime. If you found this conversation to be helpful, please share it with a colleague or a client and start a conversation yourself today. We'll see y'all next time.